This house was never yours, my daughter-in-law said the night after my husband's funeral, and my son didn't correct her. After 50 years of marriage, I thought grief would be the hardest thing I'd face, but standing in that living room, still smelling the lilies from the service, I realized I was losing more than a husband. I was losing my place in my own life. I kept my hands folded in front of me, the same way I had during the ceremony, steady, composed, as if composure could protect me from what was unfolding. The walls I had painted, the kitchen I had cooked in every Sunday, the staircase where I used to sit and wait for my son to come home late as a teenager. None of it felt like mine anymore. Rebecca's voice was calm, almost rehearsed, as she listed practical reasons, expenses, space, the future. Daniel stood beside her, quiet, avoiding my eyes. I nodded once, not because I agreed, but because I understood. Something had already shifted long before this moment. And as I turned to walk toward the hallway, I felt it clearly for the first time. I was no longer part of this family, at least not in the way I had believed for decades. I did not argue with her that night. I simply walked upstairs to the bedroom I had shared with my husband for half a century and closed the door quietly behind me. The room still held his presence in the smallest details, his watch resting on the dresser, his reading glasses folded beside the lamp, the faint scent of his cologne lingering in the air. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked around, trying to understand how a lifetime could be reduced to something so temporary. For years, I believed this house was built on love, on shared effort, on promises that meant something. But now, every object felt like it belonged to a story that no longer included me. Downstairs, I could hear Rebecca moving through the kitchen, opening cabinets, rearranging things as if she had already claimed everything. Daniel's voice followed hers, low and distant, no longer the voice of the boy who once needed me for everything. I opened my closet slowly, running my fingers across dresses I had worn to anniversaries, holidays, ordinary Sundays that once felt meaningful. I realized then that this was not happening overnight. This had been building, quietly, in moments I chose not to question. And now, I was simply standing at the end of it. The next morning, I woke before sunrise, not because I had rested, but because the silence in the house felt unfamiliar, almost unwelcome. For years, mornings had followed a rhythm, coffee brewing at 6, the soft sound of footsteps, the quiet exchange of a life shared between two people who understood each other without words. Now there was only stillness. I walked downstairs slowly, my hand trailing along the banister, noticing how the air itself felt different. The kitchen looked the same, yet nothing felt the same. A new set of dishes sat on the counter, ones I had never seen before. My favorite mug was gone. In its place was something modern, impersonal, as if my presence had already been erased overnight. Rebecca stood by the sink, scrolling through her phone, barely glancing up when I entered. She did not say good morning. She did not need to. The message was already clear. Daniel sat at the table, staring into his coffee, his expression distant, like a man avoiding a conversation he had already decided not to have. I poured myself a cup, though my hands felt unsteady, and sat down across from him. He did not look up, and in that quiet moment, I understood something that settled deeper than anything said the night before. I was not being pushed out suddenly. I had already been replaced. As I sat there, staring into a cup of coffee that had already gone cold, memories began to surface without invitation, not as comfort, but as quiet contradictions. I remembered the early years, when this house was nothing more than a blueprint and a promise, when Richard and I would stand on the empty lot, imagining where the windows would face, where the kitchen table would sit, where our lives would unfold. We built everything together, not just with money, but with time, with effort, with belief in something lasting. He used to say, more than once, that this home was for me, that no matter what happened, I would always be safe here. I held on to those words for decades, never questioning them, never imagining a future where they would feel uncertain. And yet, sitting across from my own son, I could not reconcile the man in front of me with the boy who once promised he would never let anything happen to me. Somewhere along the way, something had shifted, quietly and completely. I began to wonder if Richard had seen it before I did, if he had noticed the distance, the subtle changes in tone, the decisions made without me. Because now, those memories no longer felt like reassurance. They felt like something I had misunderstood all along. Later that afternoon, when the house had settled into an unfamiliar quiet, I returned to the bedroom and began opening drawers I had not touched in years. Not because I was looking for anything specific, but because I needed to understand if there was something I had missed. In the back of Richard's dresser, beneath neatly folded shirts he would never wear again, I found an envelope I did not recognize. It was plain, unmarked, the kind of thing that could easily be overlooked if you were not paying attention. My name was written on it in his handwriting, steady and deliberate. I paused for a moment, holding it between my fingers, aware that whatever was inside might change something I was not yet ready to face. When I opened it, a small metal key slipped into my palm, heavier than it looked, along with a single folded note. The message was brief, almost frustratingly so. For you, when the time comes. I read it twice, then a third time, as if more words might appear if I waited long enough. But that was all he had left me. Downstairs, I could hear Rebecca laughing softly on the phone, her voice light, unconcerned. I closed my hand around the key, feeling its edges press into my skin, and for the first time since the funeral, I felt something shift inside me, not grief, not confusion, but the beginning of a question I could no longer ignore. That evening, I placed the key carefully into my coat pocket, not because I knew what it opened, but because it felt like the only thing in this house that still belonged to me. I moved quietly through the rooms, taking in the details one last time, the framed photos, the worn edges of the furniture, the subtle signs of a life that had been slowly rewritten without my consent. Rebecca's voice echoed faintly from the living room, confident, assured, as if everything had already been decided. Daniel joined her not long after, and though I could not hear every word, I did not need to. The tone was enough. Plans were being made, timelines discussed, my presence reduced to a logistical inconvenience. I stood in the hallway for a moment, unseen, listening just long enough to understand that there was no space left for negotiation. When I stepped into the room, their conversation stopped. Rebecca looked at me with a polite smile that did not reach her eyes and said it clearly this time, without softness or suggestion. It would be best if I found somewhere else to stay. Daniel did not interrupt her. He simply nodded. I looked at him, searching for something familiar, but found only distance. I picked up my purse, adjusted my coat, and walked toward the door without raising my voice. The night air was colder than I expected, but I did not turn back. For a long moment, I stood on the sidewalk with nowhere to go, the house behind me already feeling like a place I had imagined rather than lived in. The porch light flicked off after a few seconds, as if even that small courtesy had been withdrawn. I pulled my coat tighter around me and reached into the pocket, my fingers brushing against the cold metal of the key. It felt heavier now, not because it had changed, but because I had. I walked slowly down the street, the quiet neighborhood stretching out in front of me, each step carrying me further from the life I thought I understood. I did not rush. There was no urgency anymore, no one waiting for me, no expectation to return. When I reached the corner, I stopped beneath a streetlight and unfolded the note again, reading the same words that now felt different than they had just hours before. For you, when the time comes. I looked at the key, turning it over in my hand, noticing a small engraving I had not seen before, a number, followed by a street name I did not recognize. My breath slowed as the meaning settled in. Richard had not left me nothing. He had left me something hidden, something intentional. And for the first time since I walked out that door, I knew exactly where I needed to go next. I followed the address slowly, not because it was far, but because every step felt like I was walking into something I did not fully understand yet. The street was quiet, lined with modest homes that looked lived in, cared for, nothing like the polished perfection Rebecca had insisted on. When I reached the number engraved on the key, I stopped. The house in front of me was smaller than the one I had left, but there was something steady about it, something honest. The porch light was off, the windows dark, as if it had been waiting. I walked up the short set of steps, my hand tightening around the key before I finally slid it into the lock. It turned without resistance. Inside, the air was still, untouched, but not abandoned. Furniture was already there, simple, arranged with intention. On the small table near the door sat another envelope, placed carefully where it could not be missed. My name was written on it again. I set my purse down and opened it with steady hands, no longer hesitant. This time, the message was longer. As I began to read, the quiet certainty in Richard's words unfolded piece by piece, and I realized that this was never an accident. He had seen everything long before I did, and he had prepared for it. I read every word slowly, not because it was difficult to understand, but because I wanted to feel the weight of it settle in fully. Richard had not trusted appearances, not even within his own family, and he had taken steps quietly, carefully, to make sure I would not be left with nothing. The house I stood in was mine, fully and legally, along with accounts and documents that had never passed through Daniel or Rebecca's hands. There were instructions, names of attorneys, details that connected everything into a plan that had been waiting for the right moment. I folded the letter and placed it back into the envelope, my hands steady now in a way they had not been for days. The silence in this house felt different, not empty, but calm, as if it was offering me space rather than taking it away. I walked through each room slowly, taking in what was now mine, not as a replacement for what I had lost, but as something that had been preserved for me all along. For the first time, I did not feel pushed out or erased. I felt clear. They believed I had nothing left to stand on. But as I stood there, in a place no one else knew existed, I understood the truth. I had not lost everything. I had finally been given back control. An elderly mother thought her life was secure after decades of marriage. But everything changed when her husband passed away, and her own son and daughter-in-law quietly pushed her out of the home she helped build. What begins as quiet grief turns into one of those unforgettable family stories where betrayal hides behind polite words and calculated silence. As she walks away with nothing but a small key and a short note left behind, the truth slowly unfolds, revealing that her late husband had seen more than he ever said and prepared something no one else knew existed. This emotional journey captures the raw essence of family stories where loyalty is tested, where trust is broken without warning, and where strength is found not in confrontation, but in quiet clarity. The elderly mother does not react with anger or desperation. Instead, she follows the only clue she has left, leading her to a hidden place that changes everything she thought she had lost in the world of family stories. Moments like these define the difference between being erased and reclaiming control, and what she discovers is not just a house, but a plan carefully designed to protect her when no one else would. The contrast between the cold detachment of the son and the quiet calculation of the daughter-in-law highlights a deeper truth often seen in powerful family stories, where manipulation operates in silence and respect is replaced by convenience. As the elderly mother steps into a life she never knew was waiting for her, the balance shifts completely, turning loss into clarity and isolation into independence. This is one of those family stories that reminds us how easily roles can change within a family and how quickly love can be overshadowed by ambition. In the end, without raising her voice or seeking revenge, she stands in a place that is truly hers, proving that in the most compelling family stories, power does not come from confrontation, but from knowing the truth and walking away with it.